Welcome back once more to the last session of the Israel Mobile Summit. We've gone from one mammoth topic and now we have another one for you, and that is privacy, the advertiser's friend or foe. It's a hot topic and we've got some of the best people to talk about it. So let's introduce them straight away and get right into this. Hi guys, to give you as much time as possible, I'm going to dispense with formalities and just hand it straight over to you guys. So I'll allow you all to introduce yourselves and get straight into it.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone. I'll quickly introduce myself and then I'll let the semi-panel participants to introduce themselves. I am Oshrit. I'm here with the CSA, Clean Software Alliance. It's a nonprofit organization that work with the software ecosystem, both on the mobile ecosystem and the desktop ecosystem, to facilitate channels of communications between market players and the platforms around policy, standardization, and communication. And today we're going to talk about a privacy-first approach and how it's going to affect the advertisers, the brands, and we will range from consumer-centric perspective to advertiser-centric perspective. So I'll let the participants introduce themselves. Maggie, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Maggy. I'm a senior UA manager at Huuuge Games, an international game developer and publisher. And we're offering free-to-play games. I'm over 8 years already in the industry, and I'm mainly working with network partners.
Thank you. Nicholas.
Hey, morning or afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick. I'm the founder of a company called FortyEight. And FortyEight sits at the intersection of artificial intelligence, human rights, and consent. And the idea behind what we're doing is to make technology more transparent, but very much coming at the view of privacy from one of pragmatism, with a background coming out of WPP, working in some of the largest advertising accounts in the world, and then jumping into a business where I try to give people ownership of their personal data 5 or 6 years ago now. I try and look at things through the lens of a consumer, but as we spoke about on our call the other day, I think it's worth prefacing all of the things that I'll likely throw myself in the hole for over the next hour or so, however long. It's all trying to swing the pendulum right the way to the other side, because if most of the audience is focused on an industry point of view, there's got to be someone that's fighting the corner from the other side. And so it's not to say what we're talking about is right or wrong, good and bad, but more that there is a different way of thinking about it. And by combining the two and putting them together, hopefully we'll find a better solution for both sides.
Because it's not like right or wrong and exactly. Fighting one side against the other, like the user and the companies here, we actually have the same interest.
Exactly. And the whole point of the panel is to have a debate, not for everyone to just nod along and say, well, yeah, I agree with exactly the same thing. That would just be boring.
Definitely. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation. I call it conversation because I think the dynamics that at least we managed to see before is a dynamic of ping pong between different perspectives. So I'm really looking forward to it. Maybe I'll start with the first question in the area that everybody can identify with, at least. What would you define as the biggest challenge for advertisers and brands in the data protection era of privacy in terms of user acquisition and user retention? Maybe you want to start.
Yeah. So as I see it, the biggest challenge here really is the partial loss of attribution and transparency of the data. And, as it's common market practice is to work with user level data and to basically have the transparency of the whole funnel from pre-install to post-install events. And basically with the increased data sharing limitations, this gets very challenging. Yes. Especially now when we're then going to see just data on an aggregated level, and we don't know how the user, we don't know each user's funnel and his actions. And also, especially when we're talking about iOS and the version 14.5 and up, there it's not only aggregated data, we have data that is delayed. We don't see cohorted data anymore. And even because of a certain threshold set by Apple, we don't even get all the installs attributed anymore. So there are challenges, but I just want to add, for a company like us, it's very important to compliant, to all the privacy laws and regulations. And we just have to deal then with those challenges and overcome them. And we're in a way trying, of course, to educate the players, the users, be transparent to them, and also in a way show them the benefits they have from data sharing, and that it's okay to consent in a certain way to share their data, because they can gain a lot from it.
Yeah, and I think another part of it, kind of trying to look at it from the industry point of view, really is more of a commercial challenge, kind of the short-term versus long-term value of what needs to be done, and kind of talking with different publishers and certainly different advertising platforms. I think one of the things I've certainly seen over the last number of years is how, because most businesses that aren't Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook have to focus on their kind of annual plan, their annual strategy, and their annual finances. What that means is they're focusing very short term. And so as new regulation is coming in, one of the easiest solutions to that is to simply offload some of the responsibility, whether it's technical or legal responsibility for the handling and processing of data, to other platforms like Facebook. So where we talk about attribution, well, surely the easiest, cheapest, fastest way of being compliant with regulation is to just use the Facebook tracking pixel, instead of creating your own in-house attribution solutions, because the regulatory issues around doing that, not just from a legal point of view, but then also the interface and the experience for the end user, is incredibly costly. It takes time, it takes resource, it costs lots of money. And so my sense, at least, is the biggest challenge really is helping organizations break the status quo, where they're kind of just drawn in year after year by using these platforms until they have no control of the experience or the relationship with their end users. And we've seen it kind of repeat itself year after year with, I mean, go back 15 years when Facebook went to brands and said, hey, instead of directing people to your own .com website, why don't you just bring them to Facebook? Look, we've got 2 billion people here already. Just create a Facebook page, and then we'll let you talk to your users. And then gradually the reach diminished, and then more and more, Facebook became a monopoly on that relationship. So I think it's kind of that debate between the short and the long term.
I want to add to this, though, that I don't see necessarily from a business point of view to see it in that way, that they're creating a monopoly. Just like we're working hand in hand with them, we see them as partners, and we're benefiting also from their vast experience, from their technologies, from creating solutions for us in order to target our users and be able to actually do all the to have a certain reach. And we live in a very competitive environment, and Facebook needs to make money. Apple needs to make money. We all want to make money in the end. Plus, give the user really a good user experience and make them enjoy. It's a little bit like going to Disney World, I would say. A user pays. When we go to Disney World, we have to pay an entrance fee. So also a user who wants to play an app has to participate a little bit maybe in those fees. Yes. So I see it also that we're working along with partners like Facebook and TikTok and other partners that help us reach the user in a certain way. And yes, they take also their benefits out of this.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a bit of game theory that kind of plays into it, though, because if you take banks, retail banks is a great example. a number of years ago, I would have different conversations at a reasonably senior level, and you ask them what their biggest concern is, and their biggest concern is how someone like Facebook has more banking licenses than any other financial institution in the world. And they're worried about the potential consequence of Facebook kind of dominating the financial market from a retail banking point of view. And then you go onto their website and you show them that they've got a Facebook tracking pixel on the website that's telling Facebook every single one of their customers. And they're doing that because it gets them a slightly lower cost of acquisition per new customer to the bank. So in the short term, that's great for their P&L because it shows that they're able to acquire new banking customers at a lower cost. But long term, over the next 5 to 10 years, does that not surely open the door to Facebook simply taking all their customers? Because Facebook's providing the tools to help them in the short term, but in itself, it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. Same with publishers. Facebook provides publishers with a great way of getting their content out through the Facebook newsfeed in order to drive new readers. But then as soon as Facebook dials that back, all of the publishers are then beholden to the will and the choice of Facebook. And so I think you're absolutely right. Facebook is, and Google and others, it's not just Facebook, they're all providing tools and services to advertisers right now. But the only reason Facebook has reach compared to more independent platforms is because 15 years ago, Facebook provided brands with these brand pages, which got brands to bring all of their traffic into Facebook. And so this game theory of if we keep using all the different tools and services that these platforms are giving, and right now they're driven by the need for greater privacy and the costs associated to providing that privacy, if we keep kind of feeding ourselves with them, over time, we just become more and more beholden to what they choose or what they say we can and can't do.
Luckily, there are a lot of companies there that are going into the market. So it's not just Facebook, but there are also other companies. And just going back to privacy then here, Facebook has also, they have a face, they have to look out for what the public thinks of them, and they can't just use data as they wish, also to a certain extent.
I think we've seen that's not true.
Yeah, we will not go that fast, I suppose. Not now and not answer this topic.
But I think, I don't want to take ahead of some other questions that we might discuss also. But, also an issue is, it's always an issue. Okay, we all agree that a certain extent of privacy is important, especially for the user. And we want the user to trust us, and we want him to have a certain privacy. And it's also a matter of question of who gives us this privacy and who takes away this privacy. And in this case, we didn't have so much saying in how this privacy was taken. And I think that's also a challenge here, that when we're talking about challenges that we couldn't decide on our own what we can and what we're not giving to the user, or even the user. He didn't have a voice. He wasn't really asked. He gets like a pop-up telling him. Most of the time, he probably doesn't even read it. Yes, and is just scared of. He hears the big word privacy. Yes, and doesn't even realize. And I think it's a matter on how to deal with that also. Plus, additionally, yes.
Go ahead.
Plus, additionally, there are other, maybe it's also to think that maybe this is also not the right way to work with privacy. Maybe there are other touch points, like, who is actually breaching privacy? Who is hacking the systems and taking user data? It's not necessarily, the user, not everybody who collects data is misusing that data. And especially we want to be very open with our users, and it's very important that they trust us. So maybe it's a walk around that was taken because there was a bit of a dead end, or not worked enough on who can we stop actually to breach privacy, and who can we stop to hack into systems.
Yeah, or maybe work a little bit about perception. I mean, we will talk about trust a little bit later on, because it's relevant, trust, and also maybe opportunities, or how can things or targeted campaigns can be done better, giving the constraints that we're talking about. But maybe now we can a little bit elaborate on how targeted campaigns look today. I mean, can advertisers still do them? The answer is practically yes, but how can they do them today? And what are the differences, if any, in performance, in retention, in trust? So it's a little bit picking up on the topic that you started, Maggie.
Okay, so on some channels, it's quite challenging. And, you know, we work with the data we have, and we're building reports for us to have a different view, to have it, we're basically to have an aggregated view and to be able to work with the data that we have. And there's also a little bit of a shift to channels that we can work better with, like, for example, with network partners, where we see that, I mean, some of them never stopped working on contextual data. And it's going back a little bit to this old school contextual targeting, yes, where we're targeting more on categories and versions, finding likes, you know, if one user likes this category, he might also like another category, and other contextual signals that you can target, basically. And additionally, you know, the targeting gets a little bit broader, especially when we're thinking now about creatives. I mean, we still have matrices that we can see because these matrices are like CTR, VCR, they are on app level, so we can see them. But our creatives does get a bit broader to target a more broader audience. And we're looking at different things like players' motivation and you know, you're working with visuals that you think work then for a broader audience. So it gets all a little bit broader, as I said. I would still consider it targeting, you know, because there are a lot of signals that we can still use. And yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like to me, most campaigns that people want to do are entirely still possible. It's just the way you would go about doing them. And this isn't meant to be a slight on any kind of part of the industry, but I would say kind of the approach taken these days is often quite lazy because of retargeting and because of the data that has existed over the last 5 to 10 years. People have got quite lazy about setting up and building campaigns because they just say, here's the audience of, here's what we determine as success, which is an install with a low CPA, high LTV. That's our target. Facebook, go off and achieve that for us. And so that's kind of quite a quick and easy way of just getting as many people as you can. Now, it's not always anywhere near as simple as that. But to kind of give an example of where we actually did some user acquisition in my last business 5-6 years ago, we were quite very strict about the data that we were willing to use and the platforms we were willing to use in order to acquire users because of the vision of the business, like empowering people. And so we wanted to acquire students. So we actually went away and did some quite detailed research, and we found, for example, that postgrad students at universities studying STEM subjects in the UK, where there were physical accommodation blocks on campus, led to the highest conversion rate of acquired users that then resulted in the longest retention of that user base. So we then went away and we did a load of huge manual research to find all of the postcodes for all of the different student accommodation blocks and all these different universities that did all these different things. That took a couple of weeks of like manually digging through stuff. But then when we launched that campaign, we were able to do it not just through Facebook, but suddenly all of the different job boards, all of the different independent publisher websites, all of the different kind of classified web, like all of these little kind of hidden places on the internet where the existing ad tech ecosystem just doesn't have much prevalence because it's not connected into DSPs and programmatic. Suddenly we were in all of these different places and we had an incredible success in acquiring users through that approach. But doing that was very manual, labor-intensive work. Now, I think that obviously isn't scalable. We were a very small business, and that's just not a scalable thing to do on a global scale for a massive business with huge budgets. But I think it is a good reference point of kind of talking to the idea that you can still do most of these things. But I think there is an increased expectant, like we expect it to just be as easy as a click of a couple of buttons on platforms like Google AdSense and Facebook and others, because they have over time made it that easy.
If I can add to that, and especially to the lazy part, I don't see it quite that way. Like even running campaigns on Facebook and building campaigns, analyzing them, analyzing creatives. I don't see there's anything lazy about using Facebook and all the work that is behind to actually run these campaigns and try to understand your user properly. I understand what you're saying about there was a lot of manual work in the campaign that you were researching and that you were launching in the end. And as you said, this is not feasible in a world that we're living in because we don't have the time, patience for it, not in a bad way, but it's just not competitive. It's also not that I'm like, I want to show a positive approach here that, yes, we can target still, because we also did it before we had user level data. And we will be able to, we'll be able to succeed and we'll be able to be profitable, and the user will have also a really good user experience. But there are parts of the targeting that we are blindsided at the moment that we don't see at all, and for at least for those where the user doesn't give their consent, and these are the parts where we're trying to educate the user and tell him, listen, if you do consent, yes, you will only gain, because we're building this app for you to enjoy. And we want to give you a lot of additional rewards and enjoyments. And we cannot do that on a certain level if you don't work together with us. And we also want to make him understand that we're not doing anything shady with your data. And yes, I totally understand. And it's also for us, it's now a work in process, and it will take time to find new ways to overcome this. But we still are able to target.
Maybe lazy is the wrong word, and to kind of bring it back to the privacy, I think it's maybe it's risk. It's probably a combination of things. Because my sense is, if we take social media as an example, social media really took off in the brand advertising space when things like the like button was added to a post, because what that did was it generated a data point that could be used by analysts to determine whether something was succeeding or failing in their kind of proxy of campaign success. And we saw that whole phase kind of 8 years ago where brands would just slap a hashtag on every single tweet and every single poster that they did for an advertising campaign. And suddenly an out-of-home advertising campaign's success was determined on how many people used the hashtag that was shown on that poster in one of their tweets. We see it with QR codes, how many people scan a QR code, with NFC, how many people tap the NFC. Because data can exist, we now determine that only if the data increases is the success associated to this other analog. And I think that is also kind of tied back to the privacy, where brands and advertisers are often unwilling to do things where they can't generate data directly about the kind of engagement or success of the thing they're doing, because then it doesn't fit into their magic spreadsheet that says this worked, this didn't. And so I guess laziness is probably not the word, but certainly a willingness to try things from gut instinct, from kind of higher risk, from kind of broader strategy, as opposed to highly analytical, numerical, like empirical evidence that says this does work, this doesn't work. Actually doing something, brand campaigns. When was the last time we saw a good brand campaign? They don't exist anymore, because there's nothing that shows the development of a brand gets back to acquiring users. And I think privacy sits at the heart of all of this, where now advertisers won't do something unless they can get the data about it to prove it worked or not.
I'll pick up on some of the things you both said, and maybe we can fine tune this into if it's too early to ask this question, then say so. But if you already see data about the current situation, that please share with us. So performance, trust of users, retentions of users, are these things you see meaningful impact so far with the new regulatory landscape, or it's practically panic of the market? I mean, Nicholas, you said something about, hey, if you think about it for a moment, you probably can run similar campaigns. And there's a lot of panic of all these changes right now. But when we look into real numbers and real results, maybe the differences are not really meaningful. Can you talk a little bit about that, about performance and real life results at the moment?
I think it goes back to the original question around kind of the short term versus long term. So if you take, and I keep saying Facebook, I mean kind of the big tech or the big advertising platforms en masse. Whenever you talk to any of them, they will push you down the path of doing highly attributable campaigns. Google for years was banging on about last click attribution because they knew most people would search in Google before going to a website, and therefore they could claim that last click attribution. So Google was suddenly the success. But if you look at what those companies themselves do for advertising, as soon as Facebook had issues around their brand and privacy, what did they do? They spent $1 billion on above the line advertising to kind of re-cement themselves as a privacy preserving brand. And then all of that trickles down into brands more than willing to spend money on the platform, users are more willing to sign up, etc. So while they go out and sell highly attributable kind of performance-based campaigns to advertisers that require vast amounts of data on their platform, they themselves are kind of doing the opposite in many respects. So I think the issue today is that from a privacy point of view, too much reliance is being put on the need of data. We have to have people's data in order to do anything. And therefore, we will become dependent on the platforms that enable us to do that, i.e. Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, etc. And those platforms themselves, as we have seen repetitively, do not respect people's privacy. And so just like if you were a big CPG brand and you started buying products from a child labor factory in some different country, you would be held to account on that. Why aren't advertisers being held to account on their use of platforms that have zero respect for people's privacy? And Maggy's point earlier about working with these partners, I agree. Yes, brands have to work with their obligation is to their shareholders. They have to do what they need to do to make money. Fine. But I think it's very hypocritical to on one hand say we as an organization care about people's privacy and we care about protecting them and doing the right thing by them, all the while using platforms that have been proven to fundamentally undermine the democratic process of a country, or to cause 13-year-olds to want to commit suicide because of the psychological effects of the news feed, or to like move an entire continent's worth of data from their data center in Ireland to the US when new regulation is coming in that's designed to protect that data set, to say that they won't move data from WhatsApp into another platform, then to do it a year later. I mean, this I guess is kind of the macro issue to me, which is it's so easy to say we're doing the right thing. As a company, we store your data securely in a database and we personally don't do anything with it. But once it's been aggregated and anonymized and given to one of these big platforms, well, it's not us. We're like, you can't hold us to that. And I think that's kind of the core of this privacy thing to me for brands.
Okay, so I just want to add to this that yes, I mean, you know, like someone like Apple, for example, has definitely advantages because they still see all the data and they can use it as they wish. Yes, and we do live in a, like when you're talking about you know, why is everything so data oriented? I mean, that's the world we're living in. Yes. Everything is based on data and everything is based on analyzing and using data for the right purpose. And someone like, someone like Apple, who, has also a public face, they have to decide for themselves the same way that Facebook has to decide for themselves what are they willing to give up in trust, by misusing data like this. And I think it's very extreme to say, we need to go away from collecting data and sharing data, and because I don't see that this approach will in the end benefit the user. The user, you didn't really ask the user if that's what he wants, and because I also don't think on the long run the user would understand what it means for him, because a certain amount of information would be taken away from him. Besides that, it would be on the user to filter out a lot of data that basically we're already filtering out for him. Yes, like when it comes to interests, like you want to give him an offer that suits his interests, because you know his behavior, what he's interested in. So if you don't give him an offer that suits him to a certain extent, he will need to go and do all the research. And like you said with your campaign, you did this amazing campaign, but it took so long. And we're living in such a fast user consumer world, nobody has time for anything anymore. And also our users they don't want to spend hours Googling, everything,
But just to
you
jump
still
in there,
do it, but
Yeah.
You still do it on certain things that are important to you. But I think the user itself, and he doesn't even realize it. But if we would take all of this away from him, he might realize it and might not want to support privacy as much anymore.
I guess we could say privacy, it's a matter of to what extent, by whom, who's processing the data, for what purposes, with whom sharing, because we're talking about the consumer as a single individual, and we're talking about the data collector as a single individual, where of course we have range of purposes and usage. And to some extent, I must say that I agree with you, Maggie, to some extent in terms of the user. There is no user advocacy entity in any of, at least, the forums that I've been participated in terms of data protection and what data protection means and should mean. Before you continue, Nicholas, we have little time, many questions, but little time. So maybe you can continue your last point, but then each one of you can share their 2 cents on maybe something a little bit more optimistic. We talked about challenges, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about opportunities or things that maybe can done better now, whether it's a long-term approach and legwork, but talking about brand awareness, trust, gain more trust of users, or anything that you see as a big opportunity or possibility looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think kind of moving forwards, the opportunity is to kind of for industry as a whole to kind of rethink the way things are done. And with Web 3.0, there was one of the very first US Senate hearings I've seen in a long time about technology, where they had speakers who understood the topic well enough to explain it to senators in a way that they also then understood. And so that to me was fascinating. And I think Web 3.0, from a brand and an advertiser's point of view, is going to force the shift in the status quo, because suddenly it won't then be about the data that brand has access to, because it will all be in the hands of the end users. It will be decentralized. Everything will sit at the edge by default. But I think the opportunity in my mind really comes to trying to find a way of combining all of these disparate parts of the ecosystem around security, personal data management, privacy technology, encryption, all of these different components that are each in themselves solving an element of the wider problem, which is helping empower and protect people. Finding a way of bringing them all together. And it's honestly my belief that brands and organizations are the place where that needs to occur, because for much the same reason that Maggy's point about people not necessarily thinking so much about privacy, people don't care about privacy. I mean, that's a very kind of bold statement for me to say, and typically anyone that does really believe in privacy is quite fundamentalist in their view of it, and so you end up having some heated conversations with that very small portion. But en masse, people don't really care about it. And yes, they would give their data up for a pizza, I think it was, that they showed in the US. Yet when iOS launched the data blocking feature, 96% of people blocked data from being collected by apps instantaneously. So we see that when people are given an option, they opt out, and very few of those then went back and opted in when they realized they weren't getting the things they wanted. So I think the opportunity is for organizations, brands and governments, organizations and governments to find a way where technology is more transparent. I mean, that's the area that we're focusing in with FortyEight, to make technology more transparent by informing people when data is generated about them. But to use that transparency to build trust, because then to all of the different areas we've been speaking about, then data can be collected, then it can be processed, then it can be used for all of these different purposes. My strong belief is that people are okay with that. But the issue at the moment is that we're focusing on organizations being the arbiters of good and bad, right and wrong on behalf of consumers, when very little has actually been done to understand what consumers really want, because there's no commercial interest in asking a consumer, are you happy with us doing X, Y, and Z? Because if they say no, then that company's screwed. So no one's going to ask that question. It's like a tobacco company going out and asking people, do you think smoking's bad for your health? Obviously, they're not going to go out and do that research, because everyone's going to say yes, and then they're going to be left in the cold. So I think the opportunity is for organizations to find a way of not asking that question, but providing some new way to empower people to have more of that control. So then organizations benefit and consumers benefit.
Maggie.
Okay, so my 2 cents on here and opportunities. I mean, challenges always, make company become more creative and think out of the box. And I think the opportunities, they really lie here to think out of the box now, to find new ways to deal with this situation. I mean, I agree also partly with what Nicholas said, that, it hasn't been given to the user the choice, but we are now, from a business perspective, we are in this situation now. So we have to now start to think out of the box, find new ways to deal, and also, though, to listen to the market and see what solutions are out there already. Meaning, you don't always have to invent the wheel new. And there are a lot of companies who already invest a lot of money and thoughts to bring up these solutions, and we partly already work with them and we apply them. But it's really like, listen out to this, and also, though, when we speak about the user, try to educate your user on privacy and show him that what you're using your data for, that you try to be transparent, and show him that he actually has a benefit from sharing data. And lastly, also, which is very important, I think, is to improve user experience for any company from the first touch on that you have with the user. Because in the end, you want to retain your user. It's very important in times like this to put a big effort of retaining your user, and that already starts in the acquisition, in the very first touches where you touch the user.
Yeah, so clear value, transparency, trust, I guess these are key elements. If I can just share my very, very short 2 cents. I don't know if to mention this is good or not, but also looking into markets like Europe, you can already see that the European regulator, for example, already working on regulations and programs to take out the control of the first-party data, what we call first-party data, from the big digital platforms. Again, I don't know if it's good or bad, probably bad for some and opportunity for others, but the idea is to create more decentralized units of data, from the understanding that the data is essential for including the consumer, not including, first and foremost, the consumer experience, But then again, what data, how being used, by whom being used, and where the control is put. So the control is on the consumer's hands more than on certain platforms' hands. This is something that will be probably interesting to look deeper into next year, because there are actually bills offered in this regard, like actually taking data out of digital platforms. But that's probably a different discussion. I wanted to thank you, both of you, for an interesting discussion here, and thank you, Ophir and the Israeli Mobile Summit for having us.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to repeat that. Thanks to all of you, actually, for again tackling a huge topic, doing it in a limited time frame and in such depth as you did, because it made for fascinating listening. Sorry, Ryan, we unfortunately don't have time for a question. You got quite a long one there. Yeah, thank you all. We're going to have to move on now and wrap things up for our closing part of the Israel Mobile Summit. But thanks again, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.